it's an honor to be speaking to all of you today. My name is Tom Ulanowski, and I'm representing the C45 Quality Association as the chair. For those of you that don't know about our association, we're a membership-backed non-for-profit organization, which represents upwards of 100 members that are employed directly in the legal cannabis sector here in Canada, particularly in the quality, regulatory, and testing roles. What we do at the C45 Quality Association is a number of things. We primarily do public education events to our members and the general public. We host networking opportunities, and we also solicit feedback from our membership, which is comprised of a number of QAPs, to be able to provide that feedback to Health Canada. And, during those feedback sessions, Health Canada was nice enough to invite me to talk to you all about my experience as a QAP over the last 8 years working in this industry, and to offer some advice to current or future QAPs to make their life as easy as possible, hopefully. So just a little bit about me. I think it's always helpful to understand who's giving you this advice. My background is in chemistry, environmental science. I first cut my teeth as a QAP at Canada Farms in Hope. That was BC's first LP, I believe, licensed in 2014. I joined within the first year, one of the few first employees, and helped grow that company 10 times its size over my tenure there. We had many firsts there, and we were focused on cultivation, but then got into processing and extraction later on, and I'm very proud of my work there. And then further to that, I was involved and still am with NextLeaf Labs in a number of positions, but mainly as QAP, or now a QAP. And what we do there is large-scale alcohol-based extraction, formulation, refinement, and finished product manufacturing. So those are the perspectives that I'm bringing to the table today. You see my contact information below. If anyone wants to reach out about this presentation, about the association, about my experience, please do so. Email, Twitter, LinkedIn, happy to chat. Thank you. Next slide. So just a little bit more information about, the advice that I'll be bringing. I think everyone's experience is different, and I wanted to kind of provide some context here. So I've been involved in this industry in either a consulting capacity or as a license holder since 2014. Back then you could count license holders on one or two hands. And since then, we've seen an explosion to nearly 1,000 license holders across Canada. Over the years, we transitioned from the MMPR to the ACMPR to now the cannabis regs. And a big transition for a lot of us was the transition from a direct or medical-only supply chain to a much more complex adult use and recreational distribution platform. We have a very diverse industry here compared to what it came from. And over the years, I've been involved in many aspects of the industry, primarily always in the quality or QAP side. But of course, as many of you know, when you work for a startup or an early stage company, you wear many hats. Just because you're the QAP doesn't mean you're not involved in facility design, as you should be, municipal permitting, licensing, amendments, SOPs, R&D, even the processes themselves. And so over the years, I've been fortunate to wear many hats, survive upwards of 20 more Health Canada audits and inspections. Back then, in the early years of the program, we used to get audited every 3 or 4 weeks for 1 to 3 days. So that has definitely changed, and of course, launched a number of products into the market. Next slide, please. So we've already had 2 great presentations from our previous speakers about what it means to be a QAP on paper, so I won't dwell on this fact, but to me, if you ask me, my opinion is that the QAP is de facto the most critical key person on any license holder, largely because they're the only key position that needs to be approved and vetted by Health Canada based on their education and experience. And you're ultimately responsible for the overall quality of the cannabis that you produce and distribute from your facility. And of course, that's quite a challenge, to step up to. Yes, you're dealing with SOPs, and you're managing the post-market stuff like complaints, adverse reactions, and generally a QAP on a day-to-day is doing batch or lot approval. But there's a lot more, in my experience, that goes into being a QAP, especially at a smaller or early stage company. Next slide. So in practice, it's been my experience that, especially in the early stages of a company, the QAP is generally the person with the most knowledge on site about applicable regulations. An individual that wants to be a QAP or is a QAP is typically very detail oriented. They can understand complex processes and equipment and distill that information and communicate that to a number of different audiences. You can also, you have to have the ability to interpret often vague regulations, as we all know. Not everything is explicitly defined in the Cannabis Act or regulations, and you have to do your best based on your education experience to interpret that. Generally speaking, the QAP, more often than not, will also be managing the licenses on CTLS, submitting amendments, or at least drafting and reviewing them, even monthly reports. And as the QAP, you are, in my experience, generally the lead liaison or point of contact for the license holder between Health Canada and the CRA. So when Health Canada knocks on your door and it shows up for an inspection, you should be the one greeting them in most companies, being with them for the entire audit or inspection, and then following up with responses. And, being a QAP is a fun job. Don't get me wrong. It is a lot of work, but no day is the same. You're interfacing regularly with all departments, whether that's corporate and executive, to your colleagues in production or operations, sanitation, sales, even legal teams. So a QAP has to have excellent communication skills and often a lot of patience, because you're managing a lot of different things at once and a lot of different goals and other people's perspectives. Ultimately, it is my opinion that as QAP, you're responsible for quality at the site and compliance. So generally, you're the internal compliance officer, and that can be an awkward position to be in when you're put in a position where your colleagues in sales or corporate want to do something, and you say that we can't, or maybe we can't because of X, Y, and Z. So managing those positions of situations is very important. And I won't lie, again, being a QAP generally is a high stress, fast paced role. It's very rewarding, but especially if you're a new company and you're starting from the ground, there's a lot to build and a lot to do. And so, what I'm hoping to do is provide some advice or some tips on what has helped me over the years, or more importantly, what I wish I did in retrospect to help me move through the years and be a QAP. Next slide, please. So what we're going to discuss today, some of the more common challenges that that a QAP may face. Again, different people might have different experiences, but we're going to go through this list. Hopefully I can do it in the next 20 minutes. And if I run out of time, or if you want to chat about anything else, again, feel free to contact me. Next slide. So I wanted to start with, I guess, one of the most important things that a QAP or head of quality at an organization can do, and that's to develop and maintain a culture of quality. And overall, what that means is if you have a good corporate culture or quality culture, all the members in your organization at all levels generally care about the quality of their work and make decisions day to day based on achieving those goals or those quality goals. It goes beyond compliance. A lot of people think quality is, an SOP or a COA, and that might be true generally, but what you want your company to represent, whether it's consistency or a premium product or feel, that all goes into quality. The big issue is most businesses, when you're starting up, have no established culture of quality or any culture to begin with. So it's on you a lot of the time to establish that and work with management to make sure that everyone buys in and enforces these quality standards. Over time, you want the cultural quality to come from the bottom, but to start, it starts at the top. How you can kind of help is make sure that you have support from leadership, that the messages you provide staff, there's credibility there, that you involve your peers in discussions. Like someone mentioned earlier, that you monitor and measure key metrics so you can objectively assess whether you're doing something correctly or you're improving, that you're managing risk. And I think most importantly, giving employees ownership of quality issues. So some common examples are, for example, CEO walks into a grow room and they don't remember or refuse to put on a hairnet or gloves. That might seem like a small thing, but it can have big implications down the road where it's clear that the corporate side of the business doesn't buy into the concept of quality. So you want to make sure you work on things like that. And ultimately, quality culture means that everyone does the right thing, even if no one is watching, other than, of course, on the cameras. But you want to document all issues. You don't want to sweep them under the rug. You want to approach them head on, correct them, and work on preventing them. And again, empowering your employees to bring recommendations to improvements of processes is amazing. You never want to penalize constructive feedback. A wonderful thing happens when people are comfortable enough to come to you at any level and say, hey, I think I see a problem. I have some solutions. If you take them up on their feedback and you hear them out, and generally you'll find that feedback is positive and helpful, all of a sudden, they feel empowered to do the right thing and to help others do the right thing. And hopefully all of that combines into a much more efficient company with a better quality product. The other issue is most people look at quality as a silo. They look at the nerds in the lab coats wagging their hands. That's not true. Quality should be embedded in all departments. Don't treat it as a silo. And also management needs to be aware that quality generally is not a cost center. It's a profitability maximizer. Investments made into quality, as long as there's not too much bureaucracy, will pay back dividends in the long run. So, again, important to get the management to buy in to this concept of quality. Next slide, please. One of the biggest challenges that any QAP faces is communication breakdowns amongst their staff, amongst departments. Again, quality kind of talks to everyone, so tells people what to do a lot of the time or what not to do. And poor or inadequate communication can lead to frustration and conflicts. I've seen it. It's not fun, and it can spiral out of control quickly. The other thing that I learned early on in this industry is the cannabis industry attracts people from diverse backgrounds. No one went to school for cannabis until maybe recently. So you have people that are engineers and scientists and marketing people, but you might have people that have never received formal education or training that are passionate about the cannabis plant. And so you need to modulate and modify your communication, written and oral, to different audiences so that you can communicate clearly and eliminate those frustrations. And we talked about training in the previous presentations. I would argue that active ongoing training programs are especially critical to make sure that there's no issues with communication. When you're new or rapidly growing businesses, things are always changing. The regulations might change. You need to train, you need to document that training and continue retraining. Make that training interactive. Don't just read the SOP and say, everyone understand, and spend 5 minutes talking about it and leave. Do actual trialed simulations of these SOPs. Let people use new SOPs alongside existing SOPs to give you feedback. Ultimately, you want people to feel comfortable about what they need to do, and if they have a question, they should feel comfortable coming to you with some clarification. Next slide, please. So similar to the last one, a lot of the time quality is involved with many departments. And let's face it, in a highly competitive, fast-paced environment, it tends to breed conflict, especially between management, like maybe operations or sales or finances and quality. Be aware that not everyone might be aware of all the regulations and what is or isn't compliant. Often the case, there's an idea drawn up in a boardroom about a new product, about a new process that might not translate to real life. Perhaps, regulatory restrictions can limit the product type, THC content, that kind of stuff. Further to that, you can have unrealistic deadlines or budgets, which can lead to shortcuts and compromise in product quality. And it's always good to take a step back and remind everyone, including yourself, that the role of quality is to support operations and production. Everyone is on the same team. If you tell that to your operations manager, they're going to give you a hug probably, right? So, the way to improve and prevent interdepartmental conflicts is provide the people that are making those decisions or having those discussions the information or tools that they need to minimize potential future conflict. Get involved in discussions early on for new products or processes, flag concerns immediately, put them in writing, and work through the problem together. And when push comes to shove and it feels like there's a stalemate, engage a third party, a consultant, someone to provide an objective second opinion when a conflict arises, so you can move on and provide solutions rather than talking about all the problems. Next slide, please. As is often the case, again, industry is very competitive these days. There's a lot of us, and provinces are very selective these days. There's pressure, especially on the QAP or the company, to push boundaries of what's possible in a regulated environment. My first piece of advice to all of you is never assume that what another company is doing is compliant. There are examples throughout the last 8 years where companies went ahead and did something, assuming something was compliant, other people followed, and then it created a much bigger problem for everyone. So the best way to make sure that you push the boundaries but do so in a compliant manner is just to have a very intimate knowledge of the applicable laws and regulations, because it's truly the only way to innovate in this industry. And it's not a barrier, these regulations, consider it a challenge. Whenever you do make decisions, document them internally. It's going to be very useful when you have a request for more information come in, asking you about your logic as to what led to this decision. You don't want to scramble when that happens. You want to have everything documented. As you're dreaming up these ideas, confer with industry colleagues or, again, consultants. Poke holes in your logic. If you can't defend it to yourself, honestly, you're probably not going to do so when you're under duress during an inspection or audit or phone call. And when in doubt, just email the regulator directly. There's been a number of times where I've been unclear about something and I've just emailed Health Canada as clearly as possible. They responded. Generally, they'll tell you not to do something if it's clear that you can't. And if you can, you might get a more vague response, but at least you have some certainty when that happens to continue down that path rather than, having some uncertainty. Thank you. Next slide, please. So we've talked about SOPs during this presentation, so I won't go over the technical aspects. I'll just provide some brief suggestions here. So, ultimately, I want to make it clear that SOPs, and some of my former colleagues might be laughing at this, but SOPs should not be complex. They should not be a PhD dissertation, right? There should be written in plain language, incorporating lots of images and captions so that it's especially clear for anyone that approaches or reads that SOP what you need to do to complete that process. Oftentimes, there might be situations where you have slightly different nuances or variations of an SOP. And you don't want to control 3 or 4 SOPs or batch records or forms. There's a temptation to kind of make a universal form. And when that happens, it can cause confusion on the floor. So separate those forms out. It's easier for change control and retraining and improvements. And when you're designing these forms or worksheets or batch records, whatever you want to call them, it's my experience that that's what is used day in, day out at a facility. An SOP is written, it's trained on, it's read and understood by the people doing the work, and then it's kind of shelved, right, for the rest of the time. But the worksheets are used every day. So, avoid manual data entry whenever possible. Have check boxes or initials rather than having someone complete, write a few words or a sentence. Include your process steps or helpful tips in the SOP. Again, if something's critical, remind someone on that form. Simplify any equations for losses or gains or those kinds of calculations. Just plug and chug. No one should be thinking on the floor. They should be doing and following the process as is. And use formatting, bolding, borders, whatever. If someone's missing a key metric all the time, you probably just need to redesign that form. It's not the fault of the person. It's probably the fault of the form. So make it clear that you need this information. And if you don't, get rid of it. Another big thing, and this mentioned before, try before you approve. There's a temptation to just get SOPs off your desk and move on to the next one. But for a lot of critical processes, once you think you're done that SOP, give it to the operations people doing the work and solicit their feedback one final time and look at all the different possible issues, data entry, missed fields, missed steps, complete those and revise those, and then approve, and train on that SOP. And of course, embrace change control. Changes are generally good. They should happen for continuous improvement. Streamline that process. This has been an issue that I personally fought a lot of my career, right? You end up with a version 1 of your SOPs when you're starting, and then all of a sudden things change. People are coming to you on the floor looking to change, and your response is, well, I have 10 other SOPs, or I got other things to do. And then, your culture of quality, your quality of culture breaks down, because people then don't feel heard. They start doing things differently, even though they're not supposed to, and then you really have a big mess on your hands. So that's what I would suggest for SOPs. Next slide, please. Just briefly, there's a temptation as a new QAP or a new company to record everything. It can very quickly overwhelm a small quality team. You could be the quality department for a year or two. So you're only one person. Focus on what's important, most important. Don't worry about logging every time a doorknob on a closet has been cleaned. Focus on the core things that can really hurt someone or affect the quality of a product. Are you wearing PPE? Is that well defined? Are the environmental conditions well defined for each step? Are all your inputs, such as solvents and fertilizers, really explicitly approved and well defined? And do you have a process of intaking those and confirming those? Are your acceptance criteria well defined? Your packaging labels good? Focus on those things first, the big issues that can lead to a recall or lead to some sort of costly or embarrassing mistake, and then sweat the details of small stuff after. And of course, consider digitizing data entry whenever possible. Next slide, please. It's been my experience that quality is often very closely tied to quantity control or inventory control, as they should be. You always need to know for traceability where stuff is, where it went, where it's going. My first piece of advice is invest in a digital inventory management system. And if you're running a hybrid system where people work off the floor, have verification steps on those forms so that when you enter it and digitize that information, you can confirm that it's been entered, or else you're just going to have issues with kind of forms floating around. Storage has to be organized, dedicated role for inventory management. Usually detail-oriented individuals should be the ones dispensing the material. And my one big piece of advice, because I've spent many days of my life counting bottles and weighing bags and counting plants in vaults and grow rooms, is just make sure that, when you're starting a process, the inventory you're dealing with that's dispensed matches your paper or your digital records. And if it doesn't, pause and reconcile immediately. During the process, be organized, of course, use trays or groups of 10 or what have you. Maybe open one box or bag at a time and don't move on to the next one till that one's reconciled. And then when that process is done, immediately reconcile and double check the inventory. The last thing you want is to, go to your processing room at 4:30 p.m. and have 6 people scratching their heads and recounting a box for the 6th time because they're missing, a 6 vape somewhere. So track inventory granularly, standardize those label templates, get us label printing software, eliminate manual data entry. All these things can be used to improve on your inventory. Next slide, please. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart, and we just have a few left here. This is a challenge that many QAPs in the industry faces, and that is lab testing, or sometimes, as we probably see it, random number generators. I'll be honest, it is an ongoing concern in this industry, primarily on the cannabinoids in dried cannabis. Why is that? Well, we know from sales data, that consumers generally want higher cannabinoid best value products. So then provinces demand put pressure on license holders to only send them those products, who in turn obviously are pressured to get the best results. There's a lot of implications for poor testing. There's, you can break down B2B relationships. There's excise tax potential implications, and of course, consumer safety and experience. So my advice to the QAPs out there is, vet your labs carefully. Not all labs are created equal. Just because someone has a Health Canada analytical testing license does not mean at all that they've been vetted or accredited. Choose someone that's an established, preferably, maybe a third-party accreditation like ISO 17025. Blind test them. Send them the same sample 3 or 4 times labeled differently. See what you get. request those validation documents. If they send you a 1 page with a signature saying it's validated, ask more information and avoid any labs that are not willing to share. If they're not willing to help you when they're trying to get your business, they surely won't be there when you're panicking during an inspection or a request for more information. And I'll just put it out there that, from data from other jurisdictions in the US, we know that THC content in dried cannabis on a dried basis generally maxes out at 25 or 30% total THC. If you get a test result back for a dried cannabis sample that's 37%, I would be skeptical. It's statistically improbable to consistently get those results. So it's maybe your representative sampling program that needs help. Maybe your lab's not preparing your samples properly, or maybe they're just not running the samples or the HPLC properly. Whatever happens, whatever situation you deal with, document, justify, especially out of spec results. Don't just test to pass or lab shop. I would argue we have an ethical obligation in a regulated environment to get this right and not inflate THC. So I hope until the regulators do something about this issue, the industry steps up and does something first. Next slide, please. This is something that I think is very critical, is issues with finished product labels. If you look at the Health Canada Recalls website, the vast majority of recalls in cannabis are due to label issues, things like THC or CBD potency. Let's be honest, recalls are expensive, stressful, time-consuming, and probably embarrassing and bad for your brand if you continue to do that. So what can you do to prevent this, especially since you've done, spent so much time and money putting a product out to market? It's incorporate double or even triple verification for finished product labels at every step. Your proofs before printing should be double or triple checked. When they're received from the print shop or your own printing department, double or triple check them, dispense them, and right at the point of application, double check. If you put these gates along the way, which might seem silly until you have to deal with a recall, you're going to find that those issues melt away, and at some point, someone's gonna find something. And you know what? Right before shipping out a lot, do a spot check, pull a package out and double check. That little step might save you a lot of grief and time and money. Next slide, please. One of the last things I want to talk about is managing inspections. Inspections can be stressful, especially if you've never experienced one. I can assure you that all of my inspections have been very positive. I've never had an issue, some frustration, of course, but looking back, they've been very positive. And with both Health Canada and the CRA, inspections can be unannounced. They can last up to a week and involve 2 or 3 or more people sifting through all your records, looking for any potential compliance issues. The only way to not stress about inspections is to operate under an inspection-ready policy. Maintain all your records in organized fashion. Perform self-audits regularly. And if you have a culture of quality and continuous improvement, you no longer worry about inspections. You actually enjoy them because it's an opportunity to reflect on what you've built and showcase how good you're doing. Generally, just be respectful, be honest, never lie or hide anything ever. Sure, light humor is fine, but keep it professional. Request clarity whenever possible. Keep records that you give to the inspectors for yourself for future reference. And of course, don't be afraid to discuss or challenge potential observations during an audit. Save everyone time by clarifying things before that audit is done. It's much easier to clarify something over a short discussion than to do 3 or 6 weeks of emails back and forth just to prove your point. And of course, respond with corrective and preventative actions quickly and stick to the game plan. Next slide, please. The last thing I want to really drive home, because clearly the QAP role can be high stress, and this is something that I've experienced. This is something that many colleagues and others in the industry that I've talked to have experienced to the point that they've left the industry. Is don't let the high stress or long hours or critical deadlines or responsibilities contribute to burnout. You'll feel burnout coming. It's a physical and mental exhaustion. And my only piece of advice for any of you out there in this industry that everyone's, trying their best in, is to eliminate any potential reason that you will get there and burn out. Communicate your issues or feelings to colleagues and management as soon as you feel that you're kind of losing that control, and immediately make changes to prevent the issue from getting worse. Even if it's just a weekend or a long weekend or a week off, it's okay to take a vacation. It's going to be good for your mental health, and you're going to come back stronger and able to continue serving your role. And I want to drive this home that, unless you're a QA department of one, you should have other people in your department that you can lean on. So hire competent, qualified colleagues in the quality department, cross-train them on critical responsibilities so that when you do get hit by a bus or just want to take a week off, you're not stressing. Your processes, your paperwork are designed in a way that anyone with some experience or knowledge can do it. And delegate responsibilities. This is something that I was not even aware of until a recent discussion with Health Canada. Yes, the QAP is responsible for complaints, lot approval, the quality system, but it doesn't mean that you can't delegate tasks to a qualified colleague to take over some of those, day-to-day functions. And ultimately, if you're feeling burnt out, seek support from your peers or talk to a medical professional, because you're no use to anyone if you burn out, because it takes a long time to get back. So that's it for me. Thanks again for having me. I hope some of that advice was helpful, and happy to answer any questions you guys might have. Thank you.